and I didn't know what to say. But usually when that happens, there's someone that always wants to remind you that there was a slight spelling error. And every time I read them, but when you read those, do you read it with that kind of like snarky voice, even though they might not even try to be snarky?
I read it fast and it makes sense.
Greetings, I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to our bi-monthly stream with our good friends, Matt and David over at Left Reckoning. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please hit like, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you're alerted whenever we go live. Also, if you're watching on the Left Reckoning channel, do TIR a like in the sub. If you're watching on TIR, go give LR a like in the sub. That simple passive gesture goes a long way in the support of independent left media. Also, after the show, if you're a patron here on TIR, we have our man on the streets in Latin America, Camilo Gomez. He's going to break down what the hell is going on in Peru. It seems like it's a little while ago that Pedro Castillo was everyone's favorite leftist leader. Now he's out of office, and according to my conversations with Camilo, there is growing support of the right-wing regime in the more rural areas of the country. We are going to get into the weeds with Camilo on that. We might open up the phone lines. I'm not sure because Camilo has a lot to cover in the amount of time we have. It's a little later for him over there in Lima. For those that are subscribers and patrons, thank you for your continued support. That support is the fuel in the engine of the TIR machine. If you'd like to wear your support, let the people know with TIR merch. And who better to help plug this merch than the headless, faceless voice of reason and Vanna White of merch peddling, him Tucson.
Hello. Yeah, you gotta get this. The gold actually does match your Timbs too. Yeah, initially, I was against it.
See, the gold is dope. I don't know what you're tripping on. The gold is dope.
It does match your Timbs, the wheat colored ones. Original flavor Timbs. It matches your Anglo-pessimism.
Ooh.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And who doesn't want?
Got Pascal.
With Pascal.
Yeah.
Right?
I can't believe this was captured on film. He actually smiled and we caught it.
And I can't believe it actually made it on something.
I know. You can get your cute snuggly This is Revolution t-shirt with Pascal's smiling face on it. So you can look G'd up like Jason Miles.
Right? I had my TIR.
Also,
that was a pre-record we did that for. But if you would like to be a part of what we do here at TIR, have access to champagne rooms past and present, come join us for movie night. Be a part of the Mau Mau Hour with Pascal Robert and conversate with him on the spot. There's only one way to do it, and that is become a patron. for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. It's all yours. Now, we have such an info-packed show. I spent a good amount of my day reading everybody's stuff and trying to take good chunks from these articles. But thank God, not all that long. Let me first and foremost bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
How are you?
What's happening, man?
Oh man, too much is happening. I was trying to stay out of the news loop, and then everybody sent me these stories. I will say I was probably the angriest at Matt's because I didn't know about that. That kind of shocked me. Speaking of Matt, let's bring in David. David Griscom.
How's it going, fans?
Because of you, David. Texas Chainsaw
Oh,
Massacre.
there you go. Repping.
My first time in Tomball, Texas, which you probably don't know where it is, and that's totally fine. It reminded me of this movie, and I was like, oh, that shit's real.
Yeah.
Texas has some frightening locations. That's also the first time I was at a venue. I was tour managing a band, and it was the first time for all of us. I don't know how common this is in Austin, David, but the first warning sign to me is always when there's a "Don't bring your guns in the club" sign.
Yeah.
And
well,
then,
when was this?
This was I will never forget this. This was the fall of 2009. We walk into this club, and it had a stripper pole on the stage where the bands played. And we were like, oh, this is going to be a fun ass show, right? Like, what are we going to do? And, and so there's, people are gathering in for the show. And before the show's about to start, the music stops, and the owner of the bar club gets on a microphone, and he goes, I have to tell you the rules of the club. Now, I won't say what the rules were exactly, because you guys are going to think I'm making it up, and I'm going to get all kinds of misogynistic comments. I can't get it. I can't. But anyway, you couldn't mess around on the stripper pole. But after he's done reciting the rules of what's going to get you kicked out, an American flag slowly lowered.
Oh, yeah.
And the national anthem played.
Oh, did you stand? I hope.
We were, because you're at a club bar, so we're all standing. We're like, we are so frightened. But that is forever going to be how I see Texas as a whole. No matter what they do in Austin, I don't give a shit. Speaking of Austin, it's my favorite North Dakotan. Please welcome Matt Leck.
Hello, everybody.
How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm sorry I had such a long article, Jason. I know that's why I'm last.
No, I actually do. I read the links, the hyperlinks that are in articles. So,
right.
I can ask one of those questions like, but what about that? Right? I can Dick Cavett the situation. So I'm prepared to Dick Cavett the shit out of this situation.
Well, we all know what that means.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
My mom's a big Dick Cavett fan, so I have some notion of who Dick Cavett is.
That is, I'm saying I'm announcing my old age. Pascal and I are no Dick Cavett. Pascal's a big Dick Cavett fan, by the way.
Dick Cavett has some great old videos on YouTube that you can watch if you want to check out. He was really like back in the day when you thought liberals were good,
I like when he would have liberals fight.
When
you have liberal fights on the Dick Cavett show, that was like the best.
He was entertaining, but I have to admit that I was a fan of what's my man's name? The guy from Yale wrote the book God is Dead. William F. Buckley. It used to be William F. Buckley.
Oh, William Buckley.
Got him at Yale, yeah.
Got him at Yale. Like God is dead.
Where is he from again to have that weird accent?
He was originally from South Carolina, but it was weird because he had like a totally like New England accent.
David
Oh, I had not heard that before. I was surprised. I thought
Yeah.
I
It's
just
like, what?
And he was
Man.
Catholic too.
yeah, those are weird.
Catholic.
No, like Catholic South Carolinians is like a very particular kind of character. Wait, was he
Well,
really? It's not saying
Jefferson
I don't know
Davis,
if we're-
right?
If we're right about this,
No, he wasn't. South Carolina.
Jefferson Davis was the Pope. I can't remember the Pope during the Civil War, but was like very friendly towards the Confederacy and sent Jefferson Davis after the war when he was imprisoned or whatever a crown of thorns, and privately. Apparently, Jefferson Davis had said that he was interested in converting to Catholicism, but I don't think he got around to it.
I think he did. Well, Oscar Wilde. If we were around 100 or whatever years ago, Oscar Wilde was speaking around the states, and he visited and ate dinner with Jefferson Davis, and Jefferson Davis and it talked about the Catholicism thing. And Jefferson Davis was really awkward because he was around such an effeminate man. And there was rumors that he sort of like disguised himself as a woman to flee the Union Army during the Civil War. So that was a very touchy subject for him.
Also, just so we're getting our facts straight, I pull up the Wikipedia. Buckley was born to a Texas-born lawyer in New York City, and his mom's from New Orleans. So
yeah, that explains it.
That probably explains the weird accent. Yeah.
It's called a mid-Atlantic. I watched the whole thing on it. It's called a mid-Atlantic accent, and it was kind of the preferred way of speaking in a certain era. And he just really held on to it in a kind of "Make America Great Again" kind of way. I appreciate it.
It was, the debate with him and Noam Chomsky is classic.
I mean, he's got so many classic ones. I think the one with him and Christopher Hitchens was really good in the early
That was a
80s.
good one. The one with him and Baldwin is pretty good. Is really good.
Oh,
yeah, that one's great.
That's the best. Baldwin, and who was the white guy Baldwin was on on Dick Cavett?
He was a philosopher. I forgot his name.
Yeah. Anyway, look, that's enough about that. We'll get into that later. We'll get into that later. We have a lot to cover. Matt, you wanted to discuss the silent indoctrination of high schoolers in JROTC programs throughout the country. Actually, hold on. Before we bring this in, I feel bad. For some reason, M. Toussaint needs 2 intros. So please welcome the producer again, M. Toussaint.
Hello. I'm just saying it doesn't explain anything for new people. I've seen people say, "Who's that woman? What's that woman's voice?"
Look, they're going to have to deal with the fact that we don't allow skirts on the show.
Oh, right.
They're just going to have to deal with the seen but not heard aspect of what we do here. Jesus.
Terrible.
It's a boys' club.
Clearly.
Yeah, man.
I'm going to get kicked in the testicles in New York. But, Matt, from your piece of the New York Times, JROTC programs taught by military veterans at some 3,500 high schools across the country are supposed to be elective, and the Pentagon has said that requiring students to take them goes against its guidelines. But the New York Times found that thousands of public school students were being funneled into classes without ever have chosen them, either as an explicit requirement or by being automatically enrolled. A review of JROTC enrollment data collected from more than 200 public records requests showed that dozens of schools have made the program mandatory or steered more than 75% of students in a single grade into the class, including schools in Detroit, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Oklahoma City, and Mobile, Alabama. A vast majority of the schools with those high enrollment numbers were attended by a large proportion of non-white students and those from low-income households, the Times found. Matt, what the hell is going on with this indoctrination into the armed forces?
Yeah, I mean, it's always wild to me the way the right sort of projects certain panics onto, and uses it to basically stoke fear. And then there's actually things to be super concerned about with the things that your kids are being subjected to in school. I don't know if you can share this for me, Jason. There's this article
Sure.
here. Thousands of teens being pushed, as Jason said, in the military's junior ROTC. And I believe he read that part. JROTC classes, which offer instructions in a wide range of topics, including leadership, civic value. I mean, I guess I'll hold my scoffing off before I finish reading it. Including leadership, civic values, weapons handling, and financial literacy, have provided the military with a valuable way to interact with teenagers at a time when it is facing its most serious recruiting challenges since the end of the Vietnam War. While Pentagon officials have long insisted that JROTC is not a recruiting tool, I mean, can we just stop? Like, what?
Nothing to see here.
Like, Jesus Christ! Like, and we've all, I guess, taken that because what is it? It's just like fun, just to let off some steam. While Pentagon officials have long insisted that JROTC is not a recruiting tool, they have openly discussed expanding the $400 million a year program, whose size has already tripled since the 1970s, as a way of drawing more young people into military service. The Army says 44% of all soldiers who entered its ranks in recent years came from a school that offered JROTC. Schools also have a financial incentive to push students into the program. This is where it gets really sick, and how you look at like the way our schools are being underfunded or have been structurally underfunded, and the solutions. I mean, DeSantis has talked about making up for teacher shortages by putting vets in. The military subsidizes instructor salary while requiring students to maintain a certain level of enrollment in order to keep the program. The states that have allowed, so there's why kids are all of a sudden seeing, well, I'm enrolled in JROTC. What classes do you have on your junior year, senior year schedule? I would say like my senior year, last semester I was doing guitar, swimming class, and maybe like civics or something like that.
Wow.
In the states that have allowed
public schools, badass.
It was awesome. We had it. I was very lucky.
All that oil money.
I mean, that was honestly even before it, but now they have a new school. That school is old. But anyway, in the states that have allowed JROTC to be used as an alternative graduation credit, some schools appear to have saved money by using the course as an alternative to hiring more teachers in subjects such as physical education and wellness. Later, in some cases, parents who discovered that their children had been enrolled in the military-sponsored training have struggled to pull them out of classes. Mr. Mejia, whose daughter was put against her will into a class in Fort Myers, met with a series of school officials while trying to get his daughter out. He said he supported the military, his sister is in the Navy, but was outraged that his daughter was being forced into the program. The school let his daughter out of the class, he said, only after he complained that an instructor had grabbed her by the shoulders during an exercise. Incident school officials did not dispute. Come on, Canva. Did not dispute when they noted in a response to the Times that they had ultimately allowed the girl to drop the class. So she was grabbed in this class that she was enrolled in against her will, but like we let her out of it. And I mean, it's pretty sick. I don't know how you guys, like, if you were exposed to the military, how the extent you were recruited. I almost joined. I was a kid who asked the guy for more information. I had friends who joined the reserves, and like to the point where they called me like a decade later saying, "Hey, remember you told us you might have some interest in joining the military?" And honestly, it was like, there was one time I came home. I was like graduated from college, and he's like, "There's still stuff, we can come in. You got student loan debt. You can write for our paper and that sort of thing."
Wow.
And honestly, like,
Wow.
I mean, I'm glad I chose to go to college instead. And like the reason I ultimately decided against it because I was developing a sort of anti-war because of the Iraq war politics. But like fucking Jarhead gassed me up, and a lot of like the different sort of cultural sort of things like made me think maybe this is a way to get out of North Dakota. I mean, because that seemed as realistic to me as college, because neither of my parents went to college either. So like both of them were complete unknowns. I just know I wanted to get out of the state basically. So I'm just curious what your guys is, if you had any experience with this sort of stuff.
Just recruiters at my local shopping mall, because it was the Black Mall. So
they put me in JROTC against my will.
Are you being
No
serious?
shit.
I got out of it, but
Like
yeah.
Gomer Pyle or
No, they put me in there. I was supposed to do weightlifting, for my whatever. And they messed up my scheduling and they put me in like 20 other people into the weightlifting during the football block. Like during football season, they have a block, which is just the football team. Yeah, and they try to put us all in JROTC. And I would like to say that I didn't want to be in JROTC out of some like bold anti-war stance. It was just because it's filled with nerds. I didn't want to hang out with them.
Hey, that's a good sign. I feel like.
But I mean, like, the ROTC stuff is nuts. I mean, the recruiting in high school is crazy. I mean, I had a similar experience to you, Matt. Like, I signed, I tried to sign up before I was eligible, so they called me when I turned 17, and I said I don't think so, and blah blah blah. And then they called me again when I was like 22, and I had this bizarre conversation with the recruiter who was saying, called me, but it was like, oh, would you like to talk about like your opportunities in the U.S. military? And it's like, not really. And he goes, look, I know you got a lot going on. You got that kid you got to take care of, and the wife, and all. Which I did not have a kid. I was not married. It was just, and I don't know. Maybe the guy had the wrong notes, or I think more likely than not, they're just hoping to like get somebody who's
hit rate.
desperate. Yeah, you could probably get a good. I mean, especially knowing where I went to high school, like not a bad guess to just sort of throw out things like that at that age for young men. I mean, it's super nasty stuff, and I think apart from the military recruiting stuff, Matt, like it's the underfunding of schools. I think that's so nasty about this, where it's like we overfund our military so much so that they actually are going into our underfunded schools and trying to utilize the budget that they have to try to push schools to sort of model themselves in a way that they would like to see them.
Does this also potentially facilitate even a more egregious type of poverty draft for students who are kind of economically precarious in high school, who, if they're introduced to the military as the only valid option for their financial situation, they end up just kind of like signing up upon graduation and get sucked in. And of course, we know that there is a kind of correlation between military service and becoming kind of politically reactionary. So it also becomes like a feeder school for people to kind of develop potentially right-wing kind of politics.
Oh, yeah.
Not that that's always the case, because we have comrades who've been on our show who are from the military who have solid left politics, but there does tend to be a spillover. Statistics do show that the military does increase a certain kind of right-wing tendency in those who have served. So it kind of works to facilitate the worst for our kind of politics, and also on a class and economic level as well. It's almost kind of parasitic the way they orchestrate this.
I mean, the article went on to say that the classes are filled with like historical inaccuracies in their teaching as well, which you can only imagine.
Master Chief at our high school was not the brightest bulb. I can't imagine learning.
He told you that you had a kid. Dave was like, I don't have a kid.
Get your hand off my
face! Can I tell a quick story too? So when I did go to college, I was like a lefty and all that kind of stuff. And towards the end of school, my senior year, I realized that the student government at the college I went to, American University, has like a massive budget, like $750,000 that they have a lot of discretion over. And they were literally just using that to pay like Anderson Cooper a speaker's fee. Right, which I found to be just egregious. Like, let's just like put that in like a lottery system for textbooks or something. So like, anyways, no one cares about student government in college for the most part. So me and a bunch of my friends like all ran and we tried to take over the student government to just like fuck with the budget, and we got like a Joe Biden situation where it was like 50-50. And we were up against like the dweebiest like freshmen wearing their little suits and like trying to pretend to be, in like the actual United States Congress. And the first day, this kid comes in and just like, I'm just telling you, it's like it was play acting, because like they tried to do this thing where like I support the military. And what did they want to do? They wanted to do stuff for ROTC, which they called ROTC. I'd never heard that before. And like, oh, ROTC, we love our people. By the way, these people also aren't in the military. either, right? He's like, they sacrifice. It's like they're in a club, man, and like they were trying to give them special treatment, like athletes, so that they could get special schedules. And like the first thing I did when I was elected to our student government was just fight tooth and nail this like
the
special preferential like sign up for ROTC kids, and I ended up beating it at the end. We didn't have the votes to stop it, but I put an amendment that and got that passed that gave everybody early class signups. Basically, undermining the entire point of it. Anyway,
Wow.
I just
So you
remember this
Parliamentary.
I know.
You
Right?
went on longer lunch periods, huh?
I mean, there's some stories. The funniest thing too is we had like numbers to win, but it was all like juniors and seniors who also didn't really give a shit, and you had to be there physically. And it's just like I'd throw a party on Saturday and would wipe out like the central committee because like half the people were too hungover to show up to vote the next day. It was anyway.
It does feel a little like baby fascism.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Kinder. Yeah.
And to think that when I'm reading the articles like Detroit, LA, Mobile, like, oh, all these poor ass cities with ravaged industrial sectors, a growing gentrifying class that is pushing the people that have been there further and further to the hinterlands of said areas. So to be able to have someone talk about a job, retiring at 40, which is unheard of to a 17, 18-year-old kid, especially one that has children like David.
Get your hand off my penis!
My God, David. Chad David versus Virgin ROTC.
Let's do it.
They were no match.
They weren't ready for
Fucking
David
biggest
and his
nerds
big
ever.
kids. I know you got the kids, and your ma's farm is about to get
Exactly.
what are you talking about, man? Dad dropped me off this morning, dude. And on top of this, kid, should I pull out way early? Now, Pascal, you want to talk about Canada placing economic sanctions on Haiti. Canada, our neighbors to the north, are not as nice and welcoming as people would like to think they are. From an article in Reuters, the sanctions add to others already imposed by Ottawa, including on 3 Haitian politicians in November, and are intended to put pressure on those responsible for the ongoing violence and instability in Haiti. The United States on Friday imposed sanctions on a current and former Haitian senator, accusing the 2 politicians of engaging in drug trafficking activities. Haitian gangs in September created a humanitarian crisis by blocking the entrance to a fuel terminal, leading to shortages of gasoline and diesel that halted most economic activity, just as the country reported a renewed outbreak of cholera. Pascal, how are these sanctions that Canada is placing on Haiti affecting Haiti, and are they even justified?
Well, the thing that's interesting is that the sanctions aren't particularly being placed on Haiti as a country. The sanctions are being placed on individuals, particularly who are participating, who are thought to be funding some of the rather illegal and dubious activity of the gangs and some of the drug cartels that have been existing in Haiti as a result of the assassination of President Jovenel Moise that took place last year. What is the most profound about this article and this revelation about what Canada is doing is that Canada is going after 3 individuals who are usually considered almost beyond reproach in Haitian civil society, which make war 3 individuals who are part of the Haitian oligarchy. Now, for those of you who do not know, Haiti, like most countries overall, have an oligarchy who disproportionately control large portions of the wealth of the country. Some say over 85, some say over 90%. The oligarchy in Haiti, what makes them particularly distinct is that they are not really ethnically Haitian in their origins. Many of them have Middle Eastern or European backgrounds, and they actually tend to use their ethnic or racial difference to justify maintaining a kind of buffer status between themselves and the majority of the black population of the country. And what is also interesting is that they tend to be the ones that are used by the United States to facilitate the economic negotiations in terms of the well-being of the country, the future direction of the planning of political direction of the country, and they also finance political campaigns of future of past presidents, and they also engage in activities to sponsor coup d'etats against administrations that they find unfriendly to their goals and aspirations. So what is interesting is that usually what we find is that the core group or the consortium of embassies, including the United States and European powers that have had an antagonistic relationship with Haiti, particularly since the ouster of Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, are usually working in consortium with these oligarchs as opposed to trying to antagonize them. But what is particularly surprising now is that Canada, one of the members of the core groups, is actually putting sanctions against three of the main Haitian oligarchs. Bijou is one of them. Deeb is another one, and another one is Al Sharif. They're three of the major oligarchs in Haiti, and basically alleging that they have been sponsoring large amounts of the gang activity. This is actually something that is a big deal because when you usually see coverage of Haiti in the media, they will not even mention the names of the oligarch families in the media. You rarely hear discussion of these individuals because you have to realize most of these guys have American passports or European passports. They're able to function outside of Haiti. They travel to the United States. Most of them have residences in Florida or other parts of the United States. So they actually work, and oftentimes they actually testify before the United States Congress on issues of politics and trade with Haiti. But to see that the actual Canadian government is taking effort to go against these individuals who usually work in tandem with international actors to undermine the political aspirations of the domestic Haitian people tells me that there's a turning in the wind of the political direction, and it's possible that the core group of countries of Western powers that usually use these oligarchs to undermine Haitian sovereignty are realizing that the jig is up, and unless they find a way to actually repair the situation that's in the country, they might have to take a couple of these guys down, which would be unprecedented in terms of Haitian history.
Toussaint, do you have something to add to that since you're Haitian?
Wow. Okay. Since I'm Haitian, I mean, Matt and Dave could have something to say that they're dying to get out.
Someone on Twitter told me that people that aren't black can't talk about black stuff.
Okay.
Twitter told me. No? Am I reading the manual wrong?
Maybe.
Oh.
Well, oops.
Oh, see, look at me. I'm not letting you speak.
and you're not being racist, you're being sexist. So
Yeah.
Look at that. You gotta switch it up.
There you go. There's a difference.
Well, I do think it's interesting that they're naming names and they're going after these elites because it's true. No one ever goes after the elites. They too are nameless and faceless, and no one ever holds them accountable for anything.
I mean, this would be the equivalent of like a foreign country trying to go after the Koch brothers. Like you would never hear. You couldn't imagine something like that.
Do you think there's anything to say about a U.S. relationship with Canada that might be playing into this, in the sense of Canada, wanting to chart its own path?
That's a very good point, because I would be a little bit more impressed if the United States was the country that was trying to sanction these individuals, because the United States is the one that actually has had a much more, let's say, interwoven relationship with them. And part of me is saying, well, it's only Canada. How much muscle is Canada going to have to flex against these guys? And will Canada back down if the United States eventually says, okay, this is cute and everything, but these are our people. You might want to kind of like back off. So I haven't really concluded whether or not Canada has a very large Haitian population, particularly in Quebec. I mean, I'm wondering, are they trying to respond to different political pressure amongst their Haitian population in Canada that's kind of forcing them to go after these individuals. So perhaps they have more or different internal domestic pressure that's forcing them to respond to a phenomenon that's not existing in the United States. That would be one of my suspicions as to why the Canadians are going on their own against these oligarchs.
Mm-hmm. You're quiet, Matt.
David and I, well, mainly me, I talked about the Kennedy assassination a lot this week, and I'm like just reading these stories of the Moise assassination, and all that's just open, and it's not like some wacky researchers who are like writing endless amount of letters to government agencies. It's CNN, Moise was killed last Wednesday in an operation that Haitian authorities say involved at least 28 people, many of them Colombian mercenaries hired through a Florida-based security company. And it's like, well, Florida-based like mercenaries it's like JFK o'clock. It's like what is like the way that we know all of this stuff, and like is that sort of like forcing the hand of some of this, or?
Well, I mean, the thing is, though, and I've said this publicly and I'll say it again, I mean, some people may find it controversial, is that no one assassinates a Haitian president without the green light of the United States State Department. I'm sorry, it doesn't happen. How much knowledge did they have beforehand, or how much did they participate in, is questionable. It's dubious. Maybe it was, but there's a former U.S. ambassador, as a matter of fact, who Ryan Gribb did a story on, saying that one of the comments she made in a congressional investigation on Haiti about Jovenel Moise, she literally said, we've got to set him aside one way or the other and put in somebody who is more pliable to our demands. And this was like months before Moise is assassinated. Now, take that for what it will. I'm not saying that's a smoking gun to say that the U.S. was behind the assassination, but I just find it interesting that she was so cognizant of the fact that this guy had to be taken out of the way for the United States to facilitate its own kind of motivations and machinations in the country, that it's kind of interesting that within a couple of months of that statement, he's axed.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Well, on that sad note, David, you wanted to talk about your home state of Texas.
Yeah, something I don't like to talk about very often, but
well, if you read James Foreman Jr.'s excellent work, Locking Up Our Own, decriminalizing marijuana has been part of the anti-incarceration language for about 50 years. Regardless of studies on the hippie lettuce, it's still a point of concern for pearl-clutching politicians. In the conservative state of Texas, its citizens would like to move out of the Stone Age and move into the Stoned Age of legalization of cannabis. I wrote that. But what's stopping them? From an article in the Texas Tribune, the fight in several Texas cities to decriminalize marijuana has entered a new phase as some city leaders have rebuffed voter-approved rules that largely end criminal enforcement against having small amounts of the substance. Last month, residents in Denton, college town, San Marcos, also a college town, Killeen, Elgin, and Harker Heights overwhelmingly approved ballot measures that sought to ban arrests and citations for carrying less than 4 ounces of marijuana in most instances. They also approved new rules blocking cities from funding THC concentration tests, plus removing marijuana smell as a probable cause for search and seizure in most cases. Winning over voters was just half the battle. Since then, organizers behind the ballot questions in some cities have clashed with their city and county leaders who are tasked with putting the new laws in place, as well as law enforcement. Those officials have said the effort violates state law and hinders police officers. David, what is up with Texas?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things, but I wanted to talk about this story because it hits at a few things. One, I think Ground Game Texas, the organization that pushed for these ballot initiatives, has been really smart in recognizing that in a moment where it seems like a lot of state level stuff is sort of foreclosed for progressives, doing things on the city and local level seem to be a way to get politics in the state more in line with the folks. And if people are familiar with me, my writings for Jacobin and the stuff we do on Left Reckoning, I always try to remind folks that the narrative about Texas oftentimes misses the point. There's a lot of voter depression in this state. There's a voter suppression, certainly. But more importantly, the ruling party and the ruling system in this place doesn't really reflect the values of most Texans, from everything from stuff like marijuana to things like abortion, right? We have, an abortion ban effectively in this state. And it's something like 10, 15% of people support that, right? And, you have to remember when you're doing politics here, or even just thinking on a national level about Texas, that this is a place where democracy has been really foreclosed for folks. And I find ballot initiatives to be a really exciting way to get around that, not just in Texas, but a lot of other states. Our friend and one of my great teachers, Luke Mayville, has been doing amazing work in Idaho. But even there, right, he makes the gambit that, while this is a state that is dominated by Republicans on the state level, people want Medicaid expansion. People want funding for their schools. So let's just take the questions to the people instead of having to, go through the entire process of, building, political majorities in the state house to get things done. And one of the things that Luke's experienced and we're seeing here is that the ballot initiative strategy is really exciting. And I'm not saying it's a bad one, but there's a second level where these governments are really willing to try to throw out these results, even when they're overwhelming. And I think it's exceptionally worrying in Texas, as I was just saying, that like this really is like a minority run system here. In the sense that the people who run the state represent a minority interest and minority view in the state of Texas. And they're very willing to use whatever powers or abilities they have, even if they are just so clearly, a slap in the face to any kind of conception of democracy or even just popular will. And, the fights here, it's not the same in every one of these areas, but it's just one of those things where I think, for example, like in Denton, I think they were able to get it through, but there's questions I believe about like the city manager not trying to go along with it. In Harker Heights, the city council basically threw away the results of the election, despite the fact that 60% of the people voted to decriminalize marijuana. And I think that like there's the narrative about Texas that it opens up one of these fundamental questions and tensions that we have in politics here, where our system is really undemocratic and is not only was designed to be so historically, because you do have these things in the Texas Constitution, like a weak governor and all these things that should make the system, in theory, maybe a little bit more representative, right? Because the legislature is supposed to have power, but after decades and decades of Republican control and just willingness on that side of the political spectrum to just sort of play fast and loose with the rules, we are in a really dangerous moment. I think things like this, like you have to be able to try to mobilize to fight to make sure that the rule of the voters is respected. But also there's a second level thing here to make the point about the real fundamental democracy problem we have here, right? I'm not a big fan of saying like, let's not make this political or ideological or whatever. But this is one of those things where you can just make this neutral argument. Should people, if they make a decision, if the question is asked to the public, should that be something that's respected, or should the opinions, of a sheriff somewhere or a city manager or even a city council be able to deny the rule of the people? It's certainly frightening stuff. And I think, on the second level is the question of ballot initiatives. And I don't have too much that I feel like adding right now, but if you're interested in this, we had Benjamin Case on the program last week, Left Reckoning 96, to talk about ballot initiatives, because he's been studying this at Arizona State with the Democracy Institute, I believe is the name, looking at ballot initiatives, particularly in the South, particularly in places like the Midwest and in these quote unquote red states, as an opportunity for building opposition and more progressive politics, maybe more in line with like the will of the general population. But he argues, and I think correctly, that like this is one of those things where it's like you should do it. It's not an argument that we shouldn't do it, but we have to remember that the ballot initiatives alone aren't going to be able to build a more authentic politics. Because like if the strategy behind ballot initiatives is we have a broken democracy, we can use ballot initiatives to get some things in the meantime while we try to work our way out of this crisis. We should do it. I agree with that. But it's not going to be something that's going to be able to build a more authentic politics on its own, because it has to be mediated by the courts, by government officials who, as we're seeing right now, are very willing to take positions that are very much out of line with the general population and the voting public in this state and all across the country.
Matt, did you want to add something?
Oh, I was just a lot of talk and people sort of promoting Ron DeSantis, and I'm just saying I'm Team Trump 100%. Even after the Trump cards revelation, I think that was good actually, but 65% of Florida voters approved Amendment 4, a constitutional amendment that automatically restored voting rights to most Floridians with past convictions who had completed the terms of their sentence. Shortly thereafter, in June 2019, Governor Ron DeSantis signed Senate Bill 7066 into law, prohibiting returning citizens from voting unless they pay off certain legal financial obligations. And the other thing is about the Idaho stuff. They fucking came after Luke. Like, they tried to get him for corruption stuff. And, like, I mean, just for the crime of like expanding health services to people.
And I just want to be explicitly clear here, because for example, Ground Game Texas, the organization that's been sort of pushing for these ballot initiatives, I think it's an incredibly smart strategy. The 3 W's to win: weed, wages, and workers, right, has been their strategy. And they've been using ballot initiatives, local level stuff, to try to build up a stronger grassroots progressive movement. I think that's the strategy. So I just want to be clear that I'm not saying that like pushing for these things is wrongheaded. I actually think it's the right move, but it's just one of those things where it almost immediately gets hit with how undemocratic our system is in this place. That I think, it's worth making these things big stories, because they sometimes get sort of pushed to the back of the Texas Tribune on a Thursday afternoon, and then nobody reads or thinks about them again. And these are the kind of like fundamental crises that we're facing, I think, even more so than questions about the electability of certain candidates, is that we have like a system that has like really fundamental broken mechanisms for providing democracy or public say into it.
Yeah, I mean, in reading that piece, I definitely revisited, I forget which chapter it is in James Foreman's Locking Up Our Own, where he discusses in 73, I believe it was, a study came out that the Nixon administration had commissioned to see how addictive marijuana was. And the study was like, it's not addictive. You're fine. And there was this, was a city council member that was trying to push to decriminalize marijuana and to just a fine. This was in 73. And he was a white guy, and he got pushback from the more, what would you call him, Pascal? Kind of like the black nationalist contingent of the political machine that said that marijuana was a gateway drug to heroin, which was becoming a huge problem in urban DC and kind of throughout the country. And I don't know if you can make that same correlation now in 2022 that you could make 50 years ago in 1973 and have it hold water. So it's interesting that people are still trying to hold on to this kind of losing strategy of far right Christian values of abortion, marriage, and drugs.
Well, the marijuana thing, I think here is like, if you were to like just do a straight up poll and hopefully a vote, I think marijuana would be, you could legalize marijuana in Texas. The problem is when we don't have statewide ballot initiatives. So that's not an option. You have to do a constitutional amendment, which would then go to the public for ratification, but it has to go through the legislature, which aren't interested in doing that. And marijuana makes
Does the Texas legislature only work like every 10 months,
every 2 years? No,
yeah. Oh my god!
Which is also it's awful. I think I love it in a kind of like, this is just so insane and so local that like we have a state of 34 million people, one of the largest economies in the world, whose government only is able to govern every couple of years. But that's certainly a problem. But it's also, marijuana makes a lot of money for rural sheriffs in particular. Like, there are very notorious places like be smart if you have anything on you, particularly edibles, because in Texas they weigh them, so you can get felony just for having a cookie or something like that. So
Yeah,
don't mess
inside
around
cookies.
with edibles here if you ever come to visit.
When I
Just
was
eat
in
them all.
Dallas,
Eat them all.
when I was in Dallas, I had friends who were pretty cavalier with like smoking on the street or whatever, walking around. We went
Yeah.
to a suburb that to go to this party, and they turned the music entirely down, and everyone was like looking for cops and like trying to like follow every single road thing because of how they fuck you.
Well, you all know the Willie Nelson story, right? There's a famous Willie
Yes.
story where, of course, he gets pulled over by a cop, and he's got a lot of weed in the tour van. I can't remember the town off the top of my head, but it's somewhere west, and they arrested him, and it was just like, you're done amount of weed, and they let Willie Nelson play a benefit concert for the sheriff's office. And he did, and that's how he got away from those charges, which is a funny story, I will say, but it's also horrible because most of the other people who are getting locked up for that thing don't have that option. But again, it goes back to what I'm saying. It's like, this is a lot less about morality and like a really great fundraising opportunity for small town or small county, poor parts of the state to be able to get money from people who are passing through.
But won't they
marijuana.
make more money on the tax benefit of having?
What I'm saying is it's like the sheriffs and the police who are lobbying to keep that system. Do you get what I mean?
I get it, but look, I lived in,
and the Republicans don't want to be the weed guy in parts of the state, because the thing is, you got to remember, like, Texas is a state that is growing more and more urban, and the attitudes towards weed are very much in line with the rest of the country. But the ledge, while having obviously population aspects to it, has like a very strong rural cohort to it, which has different attitudes, and those people have to deal with the more Christian conservative mentality toward it, so it might not represent like a large amount of the population, but it represents influential blocks for certain people who then become an influential block in the ledge. But there's no, you can make so much money on taxing it in this state. Are you kidding me? I think that is the thing that does get mind-boggling, because there is the Republican argument for this thing now. Let's tax it heavily and use it.
I asked that question because I lived in Vegas for a short time, and coming from the Bay Area to Vegas, when I left the Bay, I don't know what it is now. It was like a half pound was personal use in the Bay Area. And going to Las Vegas, it's totally illegal because alcohol is king, right? And I never thought I'd see the day where there'd be dispensaries in Nevada, and I never thought I'd see the day where there'd be dispensaries in Louisiana, another state that, again, alcohol is kind of king. So it's interesting because you want to ask the question, how much are you really making, to your point about people passing through and confiscating cash, cars, like, what are you confiscating that's saying that this makes more sense than putting this into the municipal budget, where we can give you more money for fighting the real problem, which is marijuana is just so ubiquitous at this point. You don't really hear about it to the same level that you heard about it before, even with violence around it.
It's just broken here. I mean, I think we have something like a $30 billion budget windfall, which is insane. Most states are broke, and they don't redistribute that money at the state level. The state has like completely stopped funding a lot of things that a state government should, and that requirement then goes on localities, which is why we have a lot of like really insane, like, high taxes for a lot of things. For most people, I mean, you pay less in taxes even without having income tax here, unless you're somebody at the top tax bracket. You pay more in taxes than like a typical wage earner in California, for example, which is crazy to think about. But like, the other thing that's so funny, and it's just worth bringing up, since if we are talking about marijuana in Texas, is they did legalize hemp. So
Yeah.
they legalized hemp, but as people who know more about the stuff than me know, sometimes hard to tell the difference between the plant that has THC in it and doesn't. So they have these really expensive testing things that they have to utilize to be able to find out if you actually have an illegal drug or something that is legal to have on your person here. And it's really expensive. And I don't know if this has changed, but a couple of years ago, they had like one machine in the state. Like after they first passed it, they had like one machine in the state. It was really hard. So you had all these like, district attorneys and local government officials being like, we just can't prosecute anyone for marijuana possession because it takes too long. I think they've figured that out now, but there's all these kind of weird, gray areas, around, around this thing now. It's completely absurd, but a lot of things in Texas politics are just completely absurd. And as Matt was saying, like the fact that the ledge doesn't meet also means that it's harder to pass something like this because these boys who have had a majority in the legislature for all these years, they have a short window of time where they can pass, anti-trans hate bills and abortion shit and all this kind of stuff. It takes a lot of energy to get something up on the floor of the ledge here. And even if you might even have the Republican votes, like getting them to put that over taking away funding for public schools, like might be a tough fight.
Well, I do want to add to your Willie Nelson story. Similar to the Frankfurt School, I'm a big student of the Motley Crue School of Philosophy. And they wrote a book. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Motley Crue version of the Frankfurt School, The Dirt, where they all pontificate on the 80s and the debauchery that was that era. And their manager has a chapter in the book where he got busted flying in literal tons of marijuana in the 80s. Literally tons. And he was the manager of, at the time, Motley Crue, Ozzy Osbourne, Skid Row, and the Scorpions. Oh, and Bon Jovi. In 1988. Why he felt in 88. Why he felt the need to fly in literal tons of marijuana, who knows? And they say it was marijuana. We don't know. But anyway, to get out of going to prison, much like Willie Nelson doing a benefit concert, he arranged to have the biggest music festival in the then Soviet Union.
Wow.
Called the Moscow Music Peace Festival with Scorpions, Skid Row, Motley Crue, and Bon Jovi.
That's pretty awesome.
Well, listen, to on the coincidence of us talking about marijuana, music, and states like Texas, I do believe that today or yesterday is the 30th anniversary of the Chronic album by Dr. Dre.
All right.
The record that changed the acceptance
of marijuana. I'm glad you said that. Let me tell you something. I theorize that the Chronic opened the door to marijuana usage to kids and younger people in places that normally would not have experimented with it and normalized it in a way that it did not exist before. Because you remember, my generation, not that we didn't have people who smoked weed, but we were the say no to drugs, Nancy Reagan generation, where it was like, oh my God, you're drugs, you got to be crazy to do that. After the Chronic, man, I remember when I was in law school when that album came out. Cats in undergrad, grad school, were just like, yo.
Well, you know what I say, that's the record that really changes the way hip hop is looked as a lifestyle. Like gangster rap was fringe music, much like death metal or punk rock. Like you had to kind of be in a fringe scene. You could listen to it, but to really be about it was very different. When the Chronic hit, they weren't necessarily killing people on every album. So yeah, and Matt, go back and listen to NWA's second record, which is Straight Outta Compton. Dr. Dre has this famous line, "I don't smoke weed or cess." He has a whole stanza about how smoking weed causes brain damage on Express Yourself.
Oh yeah, I remember that being lame.
So
And I didn't even smoke weed yet. I'm like, why is he saying that?
yeah, that was you got 89, 88. We're headed for self-destruction. 92, ain't nothing but a gangster party. And
Where did Cheech and Chong play and all that?
fringe culture.
Okay.
That was like your older.
That's who my
sister's
parents
fringe.
like.
Yeah.
My parents' go-to cultural reference for pod is Cheech and Chong.
That's so awesome. But you know, it's funny too. I mean, just if we're doing music stuff, like, like a lot of artists who like you think of as like really big, and these are people folks probably won't know, but like in like the Texas country scene, like Guy Clark, Terry Allen, Doug Somm, the Texas Tornadoes.
All those.
A lot of those people went out to California because of the weed, because it was getting so difficult to smoke weed in Texas, and they all end up coming back, right? That's the story. It's like you come back eventually, but like there was an entire a lot of their like early playing days. They were all in like L.A. or San Francisco or whatever for a few years, but around because they didn't want to have to deal with getting locked up for smoking a little bit of weed when they were, strumming along playing their songs to 20 people.
Also,
in Lubbock.
before we move on and end the show, David, have you seen Tales from the Tour Bus?
Yes, of course.
Okay. That might be some of the greatest stories that you can ever hear about country music ever on Tales from the Tour Bus.
Mm-hmm.
I was recently watching it. I sent it to my cousin. I have a younger cousin. She just said, I'm watching this show about these two country music singers that were a couple. It's really interesting. And she means George and Tammy.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh, you don't know who George Jones and Tammy Wynette are? Okay, watch And I sent her the George Jones segment from Tales from the Tour Bus. If you guys, anyone watching and listening to this show, hasn't seen Mike Judge's Tales from the Tour Bus,
it's really good. It's really good.
Oh,
the Waylon Jennings story with George Jones. I don't want to spoil for anybody, but it's so good. Yeah.
Who was it? Was it Johnny Paycheck is the one that shot the guy?
I think so.
Well,
I don't know if that's a time thing or anything, but like it is funny. Like you hear all these stories, just like seem like a really small world. Like Billy Joe Shaver. It'll take too long for me to tell this story. If y'all want to hear me talk about this shit, if you like it, I used to do a segment on Ben's show on country music. I apologize to Ben. I can't remember what he was calling it, but you can hear me talk about George Jones, Billy Joe Shaver, telling a lot of these stories. But Billy Joe Shaver, like, effectively, like, drove out to Tennessee and like threatened the life of Waylon Jennings in order to write an album for him. And there are so many stories like that, and it's just like it's funny when you think about. I don't know if it's just because I'm a coward and I don't think that those things are opportunity or times have really changed. But a lot of these guys would have just been nobodies, except that they were just like a little bit crazy at the right moment to like demand something and to fight if they didn't get it. And I feel like, Chris Christopherson, just really quick. Chris Christopherson, if folks, he was one of the Highwaymen, very famous singer, one of my favorites. Also, radical leftist. He has a song he would play all the time called Sandinistas, which is like super radical lefty. He had been sending tapes to Johnny Cash for a long ass time and never got a response. He was in the National Guard and he flew he knew where Johnny Cash lived. He just landed his helicopter on Johnny Cash's front yard and walked in and gave them the tape. And that's how he ended up getting his first like big record deal. Just like, I don't know, not encouraging people to do shit like that, but I felt like you could get away with that.
Those people they're a different breed, man. Yeah. I think cats don't really realize that some of these dudes were stealing hubcaps before they got record deal, and that goes across to all early rock and roll and blues.
Definitely,
those cats were doing a lot of pimping. Those country, R&B, blues, rock and roll, those early years, to me, it's all kind of the same genre. It's just slightly different. Right, there's a drum beat that's a little different in country than the early rock and roll. If you go put on your Pandora station, which actually, unlike Spotify, is designed to take what you're listening to and give you more suggestions, you will get if you're listening to like Tammy Wynette, you will eventually get early Ray Charles and
That's cool. Yeah.
Etta James and stuff like that, because the music is so similar, and a lot of those people just very fringy lifestyles. It's also a time when the record labels really did run everything, so people weren't making money. So a lot of those stories to me are some of the most interesting in music, because it's not so debaucherous as it is just they all become these crazy hood tales of
No, really.
these degenerates getting a couple bucks.
Just really, people should go on YouTube and find Ray Charles and Willie Nelson doing 7 Spanish Angels if you haven't. It's like one of the most amazing performances ever.
And now I'm going to depress the shit out of everybody.
Yeah, there we go. I was trying to...
On that high note, let me bring you right down, punching the testicles. Thank you, Matt and David, for coming on and joining us. I don't know about you guys, but I've been getting messages from people saying they really dig this crossover. We dig it too. If you haven't done it yet, please hit like and subscribe and the notification bell so you're alerted when we go live. Also, go over and give the Left Reckoning guys a like. Again, I can't say enough how that small gesture goes a long way in the support of independent left media. Also, wherever you're watching or listening to them, there are links in the description to the live show that we'll be doing at the Cutting Room in New York City. We'll be taking our live show on the road. What we did in LA, we'll be bringing it to New York with all new New York guests. So, what better Christmas present for your leftist friend than a ticket to the show? Now that I plugged that, got that out of the way, let's depress the show you. Before we go, I wanted to touch on something real quick. That is a saying I see a lot in left spaces. Something like this: there's more vacant houses than homeless people in this country. While that may be true, housing people can be a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare. Numerous agencies, nonprofit organizations, paperwork, sometimes non-cooperative people, and we can't forget political grandstanding. I'm not saying this to obfuscate the fact that as economic precarity grows, so does the number of the unhoused population. But what is to be done? Throw more money at the problem? Is it that simple? Or is it that there is more money in funding think tanks to figure out what is to be done and coming back with feudal solutions and saying, much like my dating life, it's complicated? There's no better way to explain this complication than with the front page article I read in the LA Times. Some of you, like me, might be fans of the true crime genre. I understand that, if not all, most of it is use of force propaganda for law enforcement. Maybe I just like the dark drama. Anyway, some of you watching might remember the 2021 Netflix documentary on the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. That is smack dab in the middle of LA's Skid Row. The hotel, pretty much since its inception, was a budget traveler's hotel. Then after the Great Depression, became a bit of a place of refuge for the dispossessed. The Cecil is maybe most famous from that documentary for being the place that had what many an internet sleuth thought was a mysterious murder of traveling Canadian student Elisa Lam. Matt and David, do you guys remember that, or did you watch that?
I do remember that. Can I spoil it, or should people watch the documentary?
Go ahead.
She was found in the water tank at the top of the building. I don't know. Did they ever figure out what prompted her to go up there? I can't remember, but
yeah, she had a manic episode, and she took off her clothes, and the water tower happened to be open.
And also the Night Stalker had stayed there.
The Night Stalker did stay there, and there was several murders. I think there was a murder on every floor.
Well, be thorough, I guess.
After Lam went missing, police leaked a video of Lam acting strange in a hotel elevator, and the Cecil Hotel and its sore reputation became fodder for internet detectives and true crime buffs. But the Cecil in 2022 looks to serve a better purpose than the setting of a Ryan Murphy television series. The hotel, after being sold and going through a $100 million remodel, was set to be permanent supportive housing for the inhabitants of Skid Row. Thanks to COVID gutting the hotel industry at its onset, the investment group that owned the hotel decided not to have just a small percentage of rooms be designated to the poor and unhoused, but make money on the government dime, get market rate for single room occupancy while housing a population that has been the center of much discussion in a city embroiled in controversy. But why is the giant 600-room hotel at less than a quarter full? From the LA Times article. The historic hotel, with its haunting reputation and 600 rooms, reopened in December 2021 as a privately funded permanent supportive housing project, with most of the rooms reserved specifically for those in the bottom 30% of the area's median income. It's open to any of the thousands of unhoused Angelenos with a government-funded voucher. Many view the project as a promising new model in LA because of its size and flexibility. There aren't necessarily other projects like this, said Jet Doyle, former chief advancement officer of the Skid Row Housing Trust, which serves as the Cecil's building manager. In addition to the all-private capital financing, she notes that it's unusual for a landlord to be willing to accept any tenant-based voucher someone might have. And yet, a year later, 2/3 of the Cecil remain unoccupied. Despite how eager the owners of the Cecil are to fill the building, the problems in LA's homeless housing system run deep and are often out of the control of any one actor. In July 2021, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development awarded 70,000 emergency housing vouchers to housing authorities across the U.S., including 3,365 vouchers to Los Angeles and a couple thousand more to L.A. County. This means that there are more than 7,000 voucher holders looking for housing in the L.A. region during a time of historically low vacancy rates. The effort is part of the American Rescue Plan Act signed by President Biden in an attempt to help those most vulnerable in society as COVID-19 exacerbated their economic struggles. The housing subsidies are part of the federal Section 8 program and geared towards people and families who are homeless, at risk of becoming homeless, recently homeless, or fleeing intimate violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. In July, the Times reported that after a year, only 5.8% of vouchers received by the city had been used. As of December 11th, that number had grown to 20%. Several unhoused people with vouchers described significant wait times with the housing authority after applying for an apartment, with some never hearing back. Months later, the Cecil is still encountering the same problem. Zeeby, the building manager, says he starts the process by submitting a request for the housing authority to inspect a potential residence unit, which often takes weeks to complete, even when it's scheduled to take place within days. Then the housing authority must submit an official rent offer before the tenant can sign the lease. Voucher holders are waiting 2 to 5 months to get the necessary approvals from the housing authority to move in after applying to live at the Cecil, Zeeby said. We are not aware of any EHV holders waiting as long as 5 months to get their rent offers, the housing authorities, Van Natter said when asked about the reports of long wait times, though he later noted that the emergency housing voucher office has been grappling with a staffing shortage and a large number of submissions. Given the delays with the voucher system, local service providers are utilizing pre-existing rapid rehousing subsidies to get clients into housing. Intended as short-term rental assistance and distributed by the county through nonprofit partners, the subsidies are aimed at getting the neediest people off the streets as quickly as possible and giving them as long as 2 years to find long-term funding solution or become self-sufficient. The eligibility rules are more limited than they are with vouchers. However, the recipients must already be in the system and working with the case manager. Several case managers interviewed for this article reported no delays in helping clients eligible for a rapid rehousing subsidy move in as soon as they decide they want to live at the Cecil. About 50% of the Cecil's residents have been able to move in right away with the help of subsidies, CB said. It's been real smooth and easy to get the clients in there, said Cindy Vigil, a housing navigator for Hope of the Valley Rescue Mission. Mike Neely, a former commissioner of the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, said what's happening with the Cecil is just another example of a broken system bogged down by bureaucracy. even when the housing is available, and traditional obstacles to voucher holders, such as unwelcoming landlords, aren't a factor. Here you are with a really innovative and cooperative project between the public sector and the private sector that could work. And all that's required is cooperation from a city agency to be able to do the job, Neely said. LA City Council member, this is where people might get a little fired up. You guys know about Kevin De Leon, the LA City Council member that got, right? LA City Council members Kevin De Leon and Bob Bloomfield proposed a solution July 1st to try to fill the Cecil faster, a master lease agreement with the city of Los Angeles. Under their plan, the city would foot the entire bill for a number of rooms in the building, bypassing the red tape of dealing with federal government-funded vouchers. Outreach workers could offer housing to people on the streets and theoretically move them in on the same day. The city's Homeless and Housing Committee approved a motion to direct staff to look into how such an agreement would work and be funded, and it was passed by the city council on August 24th. There's been no movement on the plan since then, Barron said, noting that the turmoil in the city council and the recent election certainly didn't help. So I don't know if you guys have been following what's been going on in LA, but recently Karen Bass, who's been elected the mayor of Los Angeles, wanted to have a meeting with the city council to extend the COVID protections for evictions. And several city council members walked out in protest of the fact that Kevin De Leon had walked in. Eventually, De Leon left and voted from outside of the city hall corridor, but was still involved. So that's what I mean about political grandstanding. Why don't we have effective planning when we talk about housing for the unhoused population? We want to declare wars on crime and drugs. We want to indoctrinate poor kids of color into the armed forces. There is impeccable planning. As my good friend Justin Hunt says, I don't have the answer to these questions, but I would love to hear and see what y'all have to say. Leave what you think in the comments below. On behalf of Matt, David, Pascal, M. Toussaint, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We will see you in a few weeks, and we are
Out.